In Baltimore's drug-ravaged backyards, where daylight heroin hits and robberies ruled, one reluctant recruit became a narcotic legend twice over. Meet Maurice Hicks, 20-year vet of Baltimore PD and Prince George's County PD, chasing kingpins tied to 12 murders, dodging the sellout stigma as a black cop, and turning chaos into the Amazon best-selling memoir, Looking for Trouble. From recruiter tricks to community trust wins and post-retirement PI life, Maurice bears the badge's brutal beauty. This is his story. Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Sure. My name is Maurice Hicks. I'm a native Baltimorean. I was born and raised here. Left here in 2003, moved to Las Vegas after retired from the police department. Started a private detective agency out there. I was out there for 15 years doing PI work out there. And since moving back here, I've been continuing to teach at the University of Maryland Global Campus as an adjunct professor. Been there for like 25 years. And doing PI work in Maryland. And I worked for the State Department for 4 years as an investigation case manager. I've done training for the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. So I've done a variety of things in my life. I'm a father of five children and 5 grandchildren.
So for the audience, we're not going to be able to delve into everything Maurice has done because he has done a ton. But with that being said, Maurice, if someone were to ask you what your career what position do you think you related to the most on the job?
Without a doubt, working in narcotics, because I grew up in Baltimore in pretty much a drug-infested neighborhood where I used to walk out in my backyard and I would see people shooting up heroin in broad daylight. We kind of lived under siege, a lot of street-level robberies, a lot of shootings, things like that. So seeing the impact of drugs on my community and the crime, so I would eventually become a police officer and work in narcotics.
And I think it's an interesting story about how you ended up into law enforcement. Can you tell me how? Because most people say, hey, I had a grandfather that was in law enforcement, something else. How did you end up getting there?
Yes, had no interest whatsoever in law enforcement. My cousin actually wanted to become a Baltimore City police officer. So I went down with my cousin, and while I was with my cousin, the recruiter said, "I'm glad you have someone here that wants to become a police officer." I said, "No, sir, no, he is the one, He said, "Well, son, while you're here, I want you to take this test." So I was a very obedient young man. So I said, "Yes, sir, I'll take the test." So I took the test and ended up joining. My cousin didn't.
Okay, so you were with Baltimore PD for 2 years, and then you were with Prince George County Police Department for how many years?
18 years.
18 years, so a total of 20. Why did you transition from Baltimore to Prince George County?
Actually, my partner from Baltimore City was interested in joining the Prince George's County Police Department. I had no interest whatsoever. So kind of the same scenario. The recruiter said, "I'm glad you have someone else who wants to join the police department." I said, "No, sir, he's the one. I'm just here with my friend." He was, "Why, son, while you're here, I want you to take this test." So I'm like, "Yes, sir." I took the test and I ended up joining. He didn't.
Okay, so but if you didn't want to do that, why did you end up staying? Were there better opportunities over there?
Oh, absolutely. The $5,000 raise to start, take-home car, free gas, had a free apartment for 5 years because I was a police officer. The working conditions were much better. They had a uniform allowance. The shift was much better. We worked 4 on, 4 off, 5 on, 3 off. So it was. When I looked at it, it was really a no-brainer. It's only less than an hour from Baltimore. So it just had so many benefits.
I should ask you about this because I never know how realistic these things are. But you're in Baltimore and then you're in Prince George's County. How similar was, if you've seen the show The Wire?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And then how similar was that to what was going on at the time when you were working? Or there was another show on HBO called We Own the City, and I think it was related to...
Yes, it was related to Baltimore.
Okay.
Baltimore Police Department.
So how similar are those shows to what was going on when you were working?
Well, The Wire, pretty much like The Wire, other than there was an area where there was lawlessness, where they kind of let them operate. Right. That wasn't realistic, but it was pretty much on point.
Tell me about where Prince George's County is and what areas you're covered.
So Prince George's County is adjacent to Washington, D.C. It borders Washington, D.C. It borders Montgomery County, and it borders Virginia. So it's about an hour from Baltimore. I would describe the crime situation as like a beautiful place with an urban area with, a rural area with urban crime.
Oh, okay.
Particular areas that border D.C. So it's almost like working D.C. with less people with beats spread out much further apart.
Okay. Was it as violent as, say, Baltimore? Because I noticed when you started in 1983, there were 201 homicides in Baltimore. And in Prince George's County in 85, there were only 47. So what is it as violent in Prince George's as opposed to Baltimore?
Not quite as violent. They had, in Baltimore, we had about 2,300 officers. Prince George, we had 1,400, about two and a half times the size of Baltimore, the county was. So we had a lot less officers for bigger areas. But as far as violence is concerned, Baltimore was notorious for street robberies. Prince George was notorious for commercial armed robberies and street robberies. But more so the commercial robberies and working robberies. So there's a lot of robberies. Baltimore had a problem with heroin and cocaine and crack. Prince George had a problem with the same, plus they had a lot of people on PCP, something I never saw in Baltimore. So we had a lot of crime, a lot of violence, a lot of fights with people on PCP.
Tell me, before we start getting into your career, tell me what was the epiphany for you? Because you didn't really necessarily want to go into law enforcement. At what point, how long were you into your career? Did you say, yeah, this is my calling, this is what I want to do?
Well, actually, the first day I stepped in the academy, I knew I'd do 20 years.
Really?
Yeah, I knew I loved it. It was something where I could use my mind. I had been in the Marine Corps. And the idea of, even in the academy, I was saying to them, you mean to tell me you're going to pay me to go to school and work out things I love to do? So I just knew it would be something where I could use my mind. I could think through situations. So I just knew from the day I walked in the academy, it was going to be a career for me.
Okay, but along the way, was there something? Did anything happen? I mean, I know that there's a integral story you talk about. One of your friends getting robbed, and then there was a lady that got robbed. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah. Well, one thing is when I was growing up in Baltimore, again living across the street from a heroin den, my neighbors, these guys who were shooting up heroin, they decided to rob my neighbor's house. They burglarized her home. And on the way back from her home, one of the young men, about 15 years old, pulls out a gun and he shows me this big silver gun. And I'm about 10 or 11 years old, and he motions me to be quiet. So I'm standing there petrified in my backyard, And a few minutes later, my mentor came home and she asked me a simple question. Did you see anything? And I hesitated for a moment, and I said no. I said no because number one, I was afraid what he'd do to me and my family. And there was a code that we grew up with, never to snitch on anybody, didn't nobody like to snitch. So that troubled me for years, that my self-esteem plummeted, and I really felt like, somebody needs to do something about this, I was baffled why the police never rode through that alley. These guys were in an abandoned garage. They didn't even need a search warrant to even go in there. And the police, I wonder where their bosses were. I just wonder why we just had to live like that under siege. And that was the first time I started realizing that I really wanted something to be done about the crime problem.
When I listened to at least one other interview, you grew up without a father, and then I think it's fair to say, and maybe you can kind of explain this, that kind of a driving force in your life was your stepfather, who didn't really treat you the way you should have been treated.
Yes. When I was probably about 10, my stepfather, he would always tell me that I was stupid, I would never amount to anything. And I would hear that so much that I ran away from home. That's how I ended up at my grandfather's house, where the heroin, across from the heroin den. So that really had an impact on my self-esteem. So I had this thought in my mind that I wanted to prove my stepfather that, that I wasn't stupid. So my grandfather told me I was going to stay there from that point on. He sent me to Sunday school, and I started developing this insatiable appetite for learning. I learned my Sunday school lesson. I would sit on my porch, reading an encyclopedia, and I would go to the library across the street from where we lived, and I would just indulge in studies. And I got skipped from the 5th to the 7th grade. So I just developed this insatiable appetite for learning, and throughout my life, I subconsciously wanted to prove my stepfather wrong.
Did I get the story wrong, though, in terms of it's really not your grandfather? It's kind of somebody that really...
Right. He wasn't actually my biological grandfather. He was a man that was with my grandmother at the time. He wasn't actually my biological grandfather, but I really didn't know that until years later.
Oh, okay.
He treated me just like a son.
Got it. So what do you think it was, Maurice? Because it really seems like you had a lot of people that were looking over you. You had your grandfather, and then later on you talk about this woman who becomes the mentor. What do you think they saw in you, or how did you gravitate to these people who ended up taking care of you?
Well, yeah, my grandfather, he really saw me as a kid who was gifted and anointed. He pretty much told me that. And he had spent most of his adult life in prison. And his whole mission in life was to steer me clear of, situations he got himself into. So that was a big part of it. My mentor, she taught karate. So she just took a liking to me, and she taught me karate. So when they burglarized the house, I felt really horrible about that. That really troubled me for years. But I actually found out the reason why they burglarized the house. She was a suspected drug dealer I never knew.
She was a suspected?
Yes.
Do you think she really was?
Yes. This is something that's interesting. I had a lot of people that were really kind to me, and found out they were drug dealers. Some of my neighbors and stuff, and they hid it from me. They didn't want me to know. The interesting thing, they didn't want me to know. In fact, when I'm threatening somebody, they didn't want me to know they were drug dealers because they liked me, and they didn't want me to look down on them, even as a kid.
But the woman who is your mentor, who's the karate instructor, who's a suspected drug dealer, she's kind of keeping you, is she steering you away from the trouble?
Yes, and remember, none of them want me to know that they sell drugs.
But why, here's my question, why not invite you in and go, I'm a drug dealer, this is the way you can make money? Why are they steering you away from that?
That is something that I've always been baffled about, but I think they just saw something in me that they really didn't want me involved in it, and they really didn't want me to know that they were involved in it.
Oh, that's interesting. So tell me about how you were as a kid, because you describe yourself as an introvert. So tell me how you were as a kid.
I was very quiet. You couldn't get 2 words out of me. Even up to high school, you couldn't get 2 words out of me. I think a lot of it came from my stepfather telling me I would be stupid, and I would never amount to anything. So I was really quiet. I was like, some people say like a little Steve Urkel, just a person who just loved learning.
Okay, so with that being said, you're super quiet. You barely are saying 2 words. Once you get to the police department, though, I'm assuming you have to interact with people and you have to talk with people. Where do you think you got your communication skills? Was it in the Marines?
Absolutely. The Marines was a game changer for me.
Okay, and explain to me how the Marines were for you.
Interesting is that the interesting thing, when I went to boot camp, I see these 4 men with these gigantic hats. They march over to me, and they do their little facing movement. They look at me up and down and said, "Boy, I knew there was something wrong with you the minute I laid eyes on you. Something just didn't feel right." He said, "You don't belong here, son. You're a substandard individual." And one of them says, "He's a dumb old boy." And when he said that, that was a trigger from my stepfather. So I looked at him, and that was a terrible mistake. So he's, "Get your eyeballs off me, boy, get it." So he gives me what's called incentive PT. So push-ups, set-ups, jumping jacks, all these things. So I'm on the ground, doing the push-ups, snot beads running down my nose, pond of sweat under me. And he says, "Maurice," no, I'm sorry. He says, "Son, now tell me what I want to hear." So I said, "Sir, you can fire me, sir, but I'm not going to quit." He said, "You little maggot." So he said, "I'm going to make your life a living hell." And several things would happen. They would always be trying to get me because they wanted to break me because I didn't fit in, And I'm saying to myself, "Lord, what am I gonna do? These people know who I am. They know I'm a nerd, I'm a nerd." And I'm thinking I'm everything they're seeing the things that my stepfather saw, you know. So I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to make it." And I remember we went to fight with Pugo sticks, you know, simulate bayonet training. And at first my opponent was a short white guy, and then he did like this. He motioned to another tall, muscular African American guy. He motioned him, then he motioned to another one, and they pointed for them to attack me. So I remember standing there with my Pugo sticks. I had my helmet on, and he said, "Kill him!" So he goes full speed, and I'm standing there, poor posture, just kind of standing there like this. And one of the drill instructors says, "Defend yourself, you idiot!" So there's the trigger again. So he comes full speed, and at the last minute, I turn to the left and go hit him with the Pugo stick, and he falls off the mat. And then the next one, he said, "Kill him!" When he sends him, he runs. I turn the opposite direction and knock him off the mat. So he looks at me and says, "So why'd you do it, son?" That's when I had my Forrest Gump moment. "Because you told me to." So the Marines really, that's when I learned to be aggressive, assertive. That's where I started getting my, that oomph, Yeah.
Okay, so you get out. Yeah, I don't want to say you get tricked, because you don't get tricked. You go down with your, who'd you say it was who you went down with, Baltimore PD?
My cousin.
Your cousin. So you go down, and you end up getting the job with Baltimore PD. Tell me how Baltimore PD is at the time. So you get out of the academy. How much time do you get with a field training officer?
Well, when I went in 1983, field training was while you were still in the academy. So a week before you got academy, 2 weeks before you got academy, you were out with the field training officer for 5 days.
Wow.
And then when you graduate from the academy, so the last week is learn about drug identification. Then you go to your district, then you just pay on your own. So I go to my new district, and they go, "What's your name, son?" Throw me the keys to my car. "This is a copy of your post," with same thing as beat. So that's so it's like baptism by fire.
Yeah. Are you driving?
Oh yeah.
So it's not a foot post. You're just
Not initially.
So does it get to a foot post at some point?
Yes. Well,
Okay. So what happened?
Yeah, sure. I told my sergeant, I used to drive him crazy. I told him I wanted to be a detective. So I even called him on the midnight shift. "What can I do to become a detective?" He said, "You really serious about this, Maurice?" I said, "Yes, sir." So when we got back on day shift, I wanted to get my keys in my patrol car. I saw my name was on the list for foot patrol. I said, "Oh my God." So I said, "Sarge, why you did this to me?" He laughed. He said, "Your legs going to be humongous when they come off that beat." So they dropped me off in the public housing projects. Right? So I'm thinking, what am I going to do for 8 hours? So I'm walking around the projects, and I'm getting to know people and stuff. So I come across a lady, and she got her head down, and I asked her what's wrong. I'm all jovial, and she like, somebody broke into my home. So I said, "Okay, well, what detective investigating the case?" He said, "Detective investigating the case? No one's investigating my case because I haven't called the police." I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Why not?" She goes, "Y'all don't care about us down here." I said, "Ma'am, look at me. I care." So I'm a rookie. I know basic investigative techniques, preliminary investigation. So I go into her home, and she has 2 toddlers in there, and they're on the floor, bare floor. I don't see any furniture or anything. So I said, "Ma'am," I said, "Are you expecting some furniture?" She said, "Son, you don't understand, do you? They took everything." When I say everything, I mean refrigerator ornaments, Bible, coat, food out of the refrigerator, laundry detergent, clothes off the clothesline. Her home was completely cleaned out. So I take a report, get a very detailed description of items were taken, one of which was a wag with one wheel missing. So I knock on the door, and just like me, people claimed they didn't see anything. Now, everything in her home was taken, so obviously people saw something. So I continue to knock on doors. I come across an open window across the street, and I look, and I see her red leather coat, the wagon with a wheel missing, the refrigerator ornaments she described. So I go grab the lady, and I bring her back over to the house. I said, "Look inside." She said, "Oh my God, those are my things." So I ended up finding who lived there, went down, tracked her down where she hung out, brought her back, told her, "Look, the gig is up." Got a consent search from her, recovered most of her stuff, After two people saw how diligent I was about trying to help her, they came forward. They gave statements. They saw who burglarized her and her boyfriend. So I got a warrant for him. So I got most of her stuff back. But I kept on probing and probing. There was some items still missing. So a couple of days later, I developed an informant. He told me where the rest of the stuff was. I went to the woods, and there was a big blanket with a bunch of her stuff in it. So I basically grabbed it up, came to her house like Santa Claus with the rest of her stuff. And people in the community were coming out. They were like, they couldn't believe, that I went through all this trouble as rookie. So they started coming to me with their unreported unsolved cases, and I would solve the cases for them. So about 6 months later, my sergeant rolled up and he said, Maurice, how many people do you know down here? I said, I know everybody, because that was the point. That's why I put you here. You say you want to be a detective, you get to know the people, and they have to trust you.
Okay. Do you think he did that on purpose, or he didn't realize how successful you were going to be?
No, he did it on purpose. Here's the ironic thing. My patrol sergeant was a former homicide detective and former narcotics detective. Something that would prove very valuable to me in the future. I knew he, because of his background, it was intentional.
All right, I got questions now. So is that with Baltimore PD?
That's with Baltimore PD.
Okay, so Maurice, you're telling me a story that basically, it sounds like the community, I don't want to say doesn't trust, but they just don't think the police department's going to do anything for them, right?
Absolutely.
You come in, you solve the crime, all of a sudden people are coming to you. It starts breaking down that code of don't snitch, right?
Correct.
Why doesn't Baltimore PD do that more then? Why aren't they sending more guys like you into downtown to, help the community?
Well, that's how it used to be. They used to have a lot of foot beats.
Oh.
See, when I came on, there was a foot beats everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think the foot beats, that used to be you? That used to kind of solve a lot of the problems but now they've kind of gotten away from that?
Correct.
Why do you think they did that?
Probably because of crime. You have to get the calls quicker. I mean, when I was an officer, the average response to a call was 3 minutes. But we still had foot beats. But we didn't have, at that time, we didn't have foot beats and it was O'Donnell Heights Housing Project. There was nobody walking foot beat until I went there. We had other projects where we did walk foot beat. That wasn't one of them. So I was the first one to walk in that particular project.
So I got a question for you then. So you get out of the Marines, you're pretty confident at that point, right? But even with that being said, I think it's fair to say Baltimore, even back then, kind of a dangerous area.
Yes.
You hardly have any FTO program at all. How is it for you? You're getting thrown into a one-man car. You're walking a post by yourself. How is that for you? Are you scared? Are you nervous? Are you, no, I feel confident because I was in the Marines? Or how is it?
Yeah, because I was a Marine, I was confident about my ability to handle myself on the street.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay, so how long you're with Baltimore for 2 years, right?
Correct.
2 years, and then you go to Prince George County. Before you go to Prince George, are you working do you become a detective with Baltimore before that?
No, street patrol the whole time.
Street patrol the whole time. Okay, before we go to your other job, I had talked to one other guy, I think he was with Washington, D.C. Police, and he said there was a lot of corruption back then. Did you run into that at all?
I didn't as a patrol officer, but I heard about it though.
Could that be a motivating factor to also leave? Is, maybe...
No, it was pretty much by accident.
Okay.
Because I grew up in the city and I wanted to serve my city. So, yeah, it was just my partner just kind of fell into it like they did in the Marines.
Okay. So I thought it was interesting. One of the things that I heard you say during another one of the interviews, and I want to know where you think that this came from. Essentially, and I think this goes back to what you just did for that woman, right? If you don't care about people, you can't be an effective police officer. Where do you think that attitude came from for you?
Well, my sergeant, I tell you, my two people, my field training officer in Baltimore and my sergeant, my first sergeant. My field training officer was a 20-year veteran. My second one, I had two. My first one was a little out there, like Pluto, but I switched a couple days later, my 5 days, I think 2 days into it, as they switched me to another field training officer who was a professional 20-year man, did his whole career in patrol, sharp uniform, never lost his compassion for people. In fact, he taught me so many lessons that I still use today. Lessons about how to treat people, how to use discretion. So it was really good to have him as a field training officer. He said, Maurice, he says, do what you need to do. It may not be covered in general orders, but if it's the right thing to do, you do it. And I've did a lot of police work like that where I may have violated general orders, but in the interest of somebody's safety, and I went on and did it, and I made out fine, just like he said.
Yeah. When you get to Prince George County, is there a goal of what you want to do? Or is it just, hey, I want to be a good police officer?
Just want to be a good police officer.
Okay, so then how do you start getting to these different departments? Like, for example, you go from patrol to patrol sergeant, patrol commander, then you can become a detective, you're in street narcotics, you're in major narcotics. How do you start making those transitions?
Well, I can go back again to my field training officer and my sergeant, who was a homicide and narcotics detective. Talk to me about, about police work and about how to establish rapport with people. But the most important thing is I learned so much as a patrol officer in Baltimore. I was like light years ahead of Prince George County police officers because I walked the inner city. I walked a foot beat, 3 minutes to response to a call. You get on the scene of all kinds of things in progress. So you grow up really fast. So when I got there, I was a light years ahead of a lot of officers that had been on for years. And I developed a sixth sense to be able to catch people committing crimes.
Okay, I'm going to take a little detour. We're going to talk about this at the very end. However, I think it's relevant to bring this up now. So part of the thing we're going to talk about at the end is you wrote a book. What's the title of your book?
It's called Looking for Trouble.
Okay. Where did that title come from?
Well, when I grew up in Baltimore, I went through great lengths to avoid trouble. But when I joined the police department, I became a magnet for trouble. And I could, my sergeant, I'll put it this way. I had a sergeant told me, he said, Maurice, you're the only person I know that can go out looking and find a felon in the dead of winter, 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. So I just developed this knack for I could just catch people doing stuff. I had a knack for it.
Do you think that's because you like the job, you wanted to catch criminals?
I definitely think so. Yeah, because I lived under siege as a kid, and I was disappointed how the police never, patrol our areas. So I wanted to make a difference. So I took it very seriously, my job as a police officer.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you had this experience as a kid where you didn't think the police were doing their job, and you took it upon yourself to really become the police officer you expected, you thought the community deserved.
Precisely.
Okay, so couple questions. First of all, before we get into some of these detailed positions that you had, you became a sergeant, a commander. You actually retired as a lieutenant. Why did you decide to go, for lack of a better term, management or leadership route? Why did you do that as opposed to just staying a detective your entire career?
I think it all comes back to, again, growing up in Baltimore. I often wondered, where were their supervisors? How come they didn't make them do their job? A lot of it has to do with that. And then I wanted to see, I saw a lot of room for improvement because to me it was too much, camaraderie, not say camaraderie, too much lack of accountability. Most supervisors and commanders, they want to be people's friends. They don't want to hold them accountable. So because of that, I really wanted people to protect people in the community.
What kind of leader do you think you were? If I was to ask somebody that worked under you, what do you think they'd say about you?
I think people say I'm charismatic, I'm loyal. People know I'm loyal. I still have some of my patrol officers. I'm still in contact with some of my patrol officers when I first made sergeant. I've mentored them, and they've gone on to do great things, become police chiefs, FBI agents, things like that. So I've had pretty much a relationship beyond the job. Really taking a personal interest in their lives, their careers, their family, their welfare, their mental, emotional well-being, their quality of life. So I think I take a personal interest in people, my subordinates.
I always ask this for people that go into management. Do you think leadership is innate or learned? And which one do you think you fall into?
I think it's learned. And of course, just my short time in the Marine Corps, I saw leadership at its finest. I think my journey from starting in the Marine Corps, even though I kind of fell into it, but I think it was an important part of my life, important foundation for me to grow my law enforcement career. It really helped me just seeing, just some of the great leaders and their attitude and how they looked out for their troops, but they help people accountable.
Okay, so you get to narcotics eventually, and you're on street narcotics and major narcotics. Can you tell me what the difference between the two is?
Yeah, so street level narcotics, pretty much you're focusing on street level drug dealers, making hand-in-hand buys from people, crack dealers on the street, going in crack houses, things like that. Whereas in major narcotics, so in street narcotics, you're basically evaluated on arrests. It's a numbers game. They want you, to remove these people from the street. In major narcotics, it's a big difference because you're being evaluated not on arrest, but seizure of drugs, assets, money, vehicles, houses, things like that. So it's much more sophisticated because you use more sophisticated equipment. You're doing long-term investigations. You have to know how to do financial investigations on people. So it's much more sophisticated.
Why do you think you like narcotics above everything else?
Because of the way I grew up, seeing people, on drugs. We call the dope fiend lean. I used to watch people shooting up heroin, leaning over, things like that, bent all over. So having a chance to make a difference. And you can see the big difference, like in street narcotics, when we do an operation, crime goes down. A lot of burglaries and stuff like that. So you can see, I was able to see directly the correlation between drugs and other violent crimes. And I think I like working undercover.
Okay, so being an introvert, like you describe yourself, how did you deal with undercover? Why do you like it, and how did you? Because I'm assuming, well, maybe not. Maybe you had a personality where you kind of low key undercover. How did you deal with that?
Yeah, well, one thing people have noticed about me, I can shift from being a very low-key guy, and I can kind of be a chameleon to the situation, which some people find fascinating because I can be assertive, aggressive, I can be quiet, so I can kind of shift back. So one thing people said about me, they said, "Well, Maurice, you won't be in this a year or two. Your personality is not suited for it." But they were wrong because, like I said, I can adapt to a situation. And that also comes back to Marines, learn how to adapt to any situation.
Yeah. What about undercover did you like?
Well, I like the idea of these fellows telling me how smart they are and how the police will never catch and then talking to the police. Yeah.
Did you like the story, though? Did you like kind of coming up with the story and dealing with these guys and, buying whatever you were buying from them?
Yeah. Well, I've always wanted to be an actor. I've been at 2 acting schools.
Okay.
So this was my first, audition for acting.
Okay.
So this was like perfect for my future, something I want to do in the future anyway.
Yeah. What did you find more dangerous? Was it the street level stuff or was it the major narcotics stuff?
I would say street narcotics because you're doing it more often. You're doing it every day. You're coming in contact with people. You go in a crack house with 17, 19, 21 people. You're on the street, you're getting out of a car where drug deals all over the place. So because you did it more often.
That's interesting because I would have assumed it was street narcotics as well, but I would have thought because you're dealing with kind of the low level guys, I would have thought they'd have been more dangerous as opposed to kind of a businessman type major narcotics, but different reason then for you.
Yeah, but it's still dangerous doing major narcotics because, for me, I'm trying to infiltrate Jamaican posses, European, PCP operations, things like that. So some of these people, they have a lot to lose and, they'll kill you as soon as see you.
Yeah.
But you're not doing as many buys as you do in street narcotics. You're doing it every single day in street narcotics.
So you must have gotten pretty good at undercover, though.
Yes, and it's 2 different skills. Working on street level narcotics and working major narcotics are 2 entirely different skills.
Okay, tell me the difference.
Because you're gonna have to look rough. You're not going to sell drugs. You're not gonna be able to buy or sell drugs looking clean cut like I look now. But I could work major narcotics and I could be. I could look just like I'm looking now.
Right.
With a military haircut and stuff. But you have to know the different lingo, street level terms for street drugs. You got to know certain codes. We had an officer end up getting involved in a shooting because, say for instance, when if I meet somebody on the street, I'm working street narcotics, and they take me to someone else to buy drugs. Well, they expect me to give them something for making the connection. So we had a major narcotics guy who had never been in street narcotics, try to do a street level buy, ended up getting in a shooting because he got in an argument with the guys like, you got to give me something, right? And normally when you give them drugs, what you can't do, of course, is undercover. So they got in a conflict and ended up getting a shooting because of that. So you have to know there's different rules on the street for dealing with street level people than major narcotics. It's a different skill set.
Over the course of your 20 years, you're talking about a guy that just got in a shooting. Over the course of your 20 years, how many officers were involved in shootings when you were on the job? I mean, did it happen a lot, I guess?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
it did?
Yeah, we had a lot of officer involved shootings because, we have a lot of people on PCP on drugs and stuff, a lot of irrational people. See, in Prince George, we got in fights with people in PCP all the time, and they, have like superhuman strength, and they'll try to take your gun from you. So it's pretty bad.
How many, if you can remember, did you have many officers get killed on the job while you were?
I can remember about maybe 10.
10?
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that? How do you deal with, 10 to me seems like a lot.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that personally?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's definitely a lot. And then, your family and they hear about other officers getting killed, and then you got to explain that to your spouse. It's difficult. Some involved in police shootings, some involved in accidents, and it's a lot. And there's not a lot of sensitivity when you see these horrible things. And it's not like somebody say, well, Maurice, take the rest of the day off. I know, you saw something horrible. It's like, go to the next call.
Can you tell me the story about the drug dealer that nobody wanted to arrest?
Oh, yes. So I go undercover. Now, I'm a patrol officer. And I sneak into this apartment. And we have an overlap there where we work plain clothes. So I sneak into this apartment to set up surveillance for the rest of the squad. And I get somebody, although I'm winter coat on, they knew my walk, right? I guess they studied Maurice Hicks, right? It was a required course of study for drug dealers to see how I walked, I guess. So they made me. So I ended up having to call somebody to rescue me out of there. The whole community of drug dealers come out, they point to the apartment. So one of the people that's laughing at me was this guy. Well, his nickname was Dirtquake. So Dirtquake is smiling when I come out the apartment. I said, okay, yeah, you got me. He said, we got you, Hicks. I said, yeah, y'all got me right. Now, Dirtquake had just been locked up by street narcotics for drugs. So after I left the apartment, I told the sergeant, I said, hey, I got a key to another apartment across the street. He said, you got to be out of your mind. I said, no. So I get some keys to another apartment, and I'm barely watching them from the other side. So Dirtquake is out there selling drugs. Oh, this is great. So all these guys that were singing the police are on the premises, having a great time. Now we're catching them all selling drugs, right? So they catch Dirtquake, So they call me. They said, Maurice, you should come down and personally lock him up, and parade him around as your, catch of the day. Like, yeah, that's right. Get me all psyched up, right? So then they started laughing. I heard him sniggling. And I'm like, what's so funny, right? So I get in the car. And I'm about to call my mileage in to say I'm in arrest. And I go, what in the world is that smell? And he smiled at me like, he goes, it's me, you didn't know? That's why no one ever arrest me. Oh, the street narcotics got me. The patrol officers don't want me in their car.
Oh my gosh.
They were calling me on the CB, saying he was Pepe Le Pew, right? The cat that, that disguised as a skunk or whatever. Yeah, hence the name Dirtquake.
Did you have any things that you didn't like? Did you have any assignments that you didn't like or cases that you didn't like to work?
This is interesting. The only job I didn't like was community policing, believe it or not.
Really? Even though you had that success?
Because community policing turned out to be the captain and the commander's always just dumping everything on you that they're supposed to do. And you go all the meetings for them, so they just dump. And you spend more time in meetings than actually coming up with strategies. That's why I didn't like it.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how do you get to be the lead investigator of the FBI Safe Street Homicide Task Force.
Yes, very interesting story. So I'm relatively, I got about maybe 2 years in narcotics at the time. So there are a lot more people who have more experience and stuff like that. So there's a guy who's an aspiring drug kingpin who I knew from my days as a patrol officer. And he was wreaking havoc in my beat. And it got so bad that, the parents would be asking me, because I'm the beat officer, when are you going to do something about this guy, So I said, before I leave narcotics, I'm going to try to catch this guy, So I opened a case on him, and homicide sergeant was with two detectives on a homicide scene, and they mentioned this guy's name, and this lady started shaking, almost having a heart attack just by the mere mention of his name. So so the sergeant said, is the guy that bad? So the homicide detective said, we've been telling this guy been killing people for 10 years. So goes up the chain of command to the chief of detectives. They tell the chief of detectives he's a big drug dealer. So he called down to Major Narcotics, to my lieutenant, who's the commander of Major Narcotics. So he said, so tell me, Lieutenant, which one of your hot shots has him under investigation? Because they say he's been a drug dealer for years. You got all that manpower down there. So tell me, Lieutenant, who's got the case? So he said he was sweating bullets. And, they checked the computer and came up. After investigation, Detective Hicks, arrest made. So he gets on the phone. Yeah, one of my men, one of my men is on it, and they've already made an arrest. So he calls me in his office. I'll never forget. I come to the office. He said, Lieutenant wants to see you. So, oh Lord, what now? Right? He said, so I go in. He said, you know something? He said, people walk around here think they God's gift to narcotics, right? He said, so he tells me the story about, how the chief detective called him. He said, well, when they found out I wanted to send a detective homicide, all these blanks were lined up to go. I said, no, none of y'all had him under investigation. Hicks is going to homicide. He said, I hope you go out with a bang. I said, okay. So that later turns into the FBI then, because he's doing these murders in different jurisdictions, selling drugs in different jurisdictions, then they decide to bring the FBI. Now, so we have 2 homicide detectives, 2 FBI agents, and me. But because I had this historical knowledge, because not only do I know him, I know all these guys that are running around with him. So I had this I know all these guys by name. I know their voices, which we end up doing a wiretap on them. So I know so much I know their family, I know the murder victims' families, their mothers. So because of this historical knowledge of all these people, I end up taking lead in the investigation.
So kind of a mistake that you become a homicide detective, right?
Right. Yeah. So just because it's amazing how things work, because parents were telling me, you need to do something about this guy. And now I had the resource of the whole FBI at my disposal, the FBI and homicide and narcotics at my disposal. And at the time, I'm not even a sergeant, I'm just a detective. I have other people signed to me and everything else. So it's like now, I can actually try to help these people,
Tell me about how that task force works. I'm assuming there was FBI agents. Was it just FBI in Prince George County, or was there?
Yeah. So it was. It started out was like, again, 2 homicide detectives, myself, 2 FBI agents, specifically signed. But everybody was pretty much helping on the case. The whole office was helping on the case. Then we brought in state police. We ended up having 2 state troopers on the task force as well.
Can you tell me about the murder with the waitress, her nephew?
Yeah, so I'm in street patrol, and I hear a call go out for disturbance. And they go out that night, and then they don't, they don't find what actually was going on. The one lady says, there's nothing going on here, so they leave. So come to find out, this lady had flipped out on PCP, and she had dismembered her son. And so, so I was talking to an officer who was left in the house with the body, and he was telling me all the stuff he was going through. He had to stay there all them hours and stuff like that, worrying about whoever killed him coming back. So the next day, I'm moonlighting at a restaurant, and I was talking to the waitress, and I'm telling her what's going on, I said, just horrible. And she says, I know, that was my nephew. I was the one who found him. I'm like, my goodness. And that was pretty bad. And she was like 19 years old. She was on to found her nephew. dismembered and everything else, So that was pretty difficult. And that, probably about 6 months after that is when I went to street narcotics. And I was like, I got to do something about all the stuff that's going on.
Okay, so wait a minute. Okay, so for the murder,
Mm-hmm.
what?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I digress. So the lady who ended up doing this murder, which is her sister, the waitress's sister, goes to church, and they ask where her son is because she always has a son. She said, well, you don't have to worry about him anymore. The demons are out of him. So she had flipped out. They found out she was flipped out and dismembered her son. He's like 9 or 10 years old.
But are you in? I guess the question I have for you: are you in the FBI task force at that point?
No, I'm in patrol.
You're just on patrol and you roll into that.
Yeah. So right. So no, I didn't roll into it. I was working the night it happened. So I didn't see it myself.
Okay.
So I have a conversation. I hear the call go out and everything out, and the next day, and I end up speaking to the officer, like I said, who was on the scene with the body for hours.
Okay, so that's what drives you into narcotics, because you figure, hey, I got to make a difference. That's really interesting. How about you were talking about the drug kingpin murder? Does that happen when you're with the FBI?
Well, several of them happened when I was in patrol, and some happened when I was in narcotics. This happens over a span of 10 years.
Right, but how about the story about the kid and teenagers that you kind of warned to stay away?
Oh yeah, so while I was in patrol, I see this kid out there selling drugs and in my beat, and I tell him, I walk up to him and I said, look, it's obvious y'all selling drugs in my beat, He goes, Officer Hicks, I have you killed. I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Let's calm down now, son. The only person you have killed is yourself. I know who you work for, and he's not going to send you a bill. He's going to kill you or send a hit squad. He ended up being murdered, this kid. So after that incident, he still hadn't been murdered yet. After that incident, I see the aspiring kingpin stand up on a hill. And parents are coming up to me saying, you need to do something about this guy, So I get so frustrated one day. I see him standing top of the hill looking down like a lion at his empire. And he's with 2 other guys, Jungle Jim and Pitbull. And I just said, let my people go. And he started laughing. He said, what you say? I said, let my people go. I said, these kids are going to be nothing but maggots for enemy fire. I said, don't you have any shame? What would Dr. King say if he knew what you're doing? He laughs at me and tells me, the only thing I understand is money. So they all laughing, grabbing themselves, laughing. I go back and send my patrol unit and just look at them and like, somebody needs to do something about this. And of course, you see the opportunity presents itself to investigate them.
Can you tell me the story? I thought this was a really interesting story about the mom turning in the son.
Yes. So I had a parent that called me up and said, Officer Hicks, my son is selling drugs, which I already knew, of course, because I work the beat and I pretty much know what's going on in my beat, like in Baltimore. This is in Prince George's. So she called me to her house and she said, wait a minute. She goes in his bedroom and she picks up this crack cocaine. She hands it to me. He said, Mom, what are you doing? I mean, when he saw my face, when he saw me walk in that apartment, I thought he was going to die. He said, what are you doing? So he goes, I said, okay, put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest. And he tells his mother, I hate you. And she looks at him and tears start running down her eyes. He goes, but I love you. And that's why I'm doing this. I'm like, it was so emotional. I almost dropped a tear on that one, And so a couple years later, I run into him, and he's got a child, maybe like 2 years, 2.5 years later. I'm off, and I see him. I think I see him in the supermarket, and he sees me, and he shakes my hand and everything else. I said, how you doing? I said, man, you look all happy. You got a child now, So I said, how's your mom doing? And he got really quiet. So I looked at his girlfriend, for clues. And then he says, she died of cancer. I said, your mother was a strong woman. He said, yes, she was, and she made a decision that no parent should ever have to make. And I'm a better man because of it. Yeah, so Yeah, I had a lot of incidents like that where these, like I said, these parents, they got to know me, and they would call me and try to give me the help, with their children. A lot of times I would see these kids going to school, no books. I get on them like, well, it hurt you to grab a textbook, you know what I mean, a school book. I'd be on them, And I remember this one kid, he told me, he said, Hicks, I don't know anything else. I'm like, man, you're 16 years old. You know plenty. Look, I grew up in a neighborhood like this. There's plenty you can do. He would end up being murdered too. And I would tell him, I said, stay away from Barksdale. He goes, well, I don't really hang with him. I hang with like the number 2 guy. I said, can he control him? And of course, he ended up being murdered as well.
Barksdale, that's interesting because I think that's the name in The Wire.
I changed all the names in my book though. I don't use the real name.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, got it. So, when did you get your college degree in criminology? Was it in the Marines or right after that?
No. I was an adult learner with 5 kids going to school. I was with the police department, so I got my bachelor's degrees in 1996. I think I was a sergeant. Yeah, I was a sergeant.
Okay, so that's interesting because there's at that point, no requirement for a college degree at that point. What drove you to not only get your college degree, but later on you get your master's degree in management from Johns Hopkins University? Why pursue that?
Yeah, well, one of the main reasons why, because I was the only second male in my family to earn a high school diploma. No male in my family had ever been to college. So I wanted to break the generational curse. And I always loved learning. And so I definitely, aspired. And plus, I learned from particularly working cases that a lot of some of our commanders, they really didn't have the knowledge how to manage these major cases. And I could give you an example of that too, but they were making bad calls on major cases we had that people could walk because of it. So I knew I needed to learn more about the job to be more effective and to be an effective leader.
How did you deal with stress on the job? You're dealing with a lot of bad things that are happening in the community, a lot of shootings that are happening in the department. How are you dealing with stress?
Yeah, well, for me, again, my grandfather got me in Sunday school early in life, when I was a kid. So I used faith in order to get through a lot of the situations. I really should have gotten counseling. I'm still really realizing the impact of everything I saw, but actually, it's hard to understand. I thought it was all normal. I thought all the crazy stuff, working undercover, I thought it was normal. Years later, after I retired, someone said, Maurice, you actually think that was normal? I said, well, it was normal for me. She said, Maurice, this stuff you've done is insane. And that's when I started really realizing it was like after retirement. He said, Maurice, you've seen all this stuff. This is not normal. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had mentioned this in another interview where you said, and this is part of the reason why I do this channel, right? I want people to actually see this that have nothing to do with law enforcement and understand or try and understand a little bit more about what you see that nobody else sees. The vast majority of normal people don't see it. And I think that was kind of inspiration for you writing your book, right?
Yes, indeed. I remember we were in the scene of a very horrible incident where this lady stabbed herself numerous times in front of my partner. And it was on PCP, like I said, a lot of people, Prince George were on PCP. And I saw him after, this horrific scene. He watched it. I saw it at the aftermath. And he actually saw her, cut her out and everything else in front of him. And he always saw the worst stuff anyway. So he always saw the worst situation. And after we cleared the scene later on, I see him on another call and I asked him, I said, how you doing? He said, how am I? Maurice, who can see something like that and not be affected by it? The woman killed herself in front of me. And I felt bad because I'm like, I didn't realize how much it impacted him. And I'm not even sensitive because I'm figuring they think we're like robots. So I'm like a robot. I asked him, but I didn't expect me to say it. I'm like, man, God, it's a lot. And I felt bad. I still feel bad this day about, just how I just didn't realize I should have went to him, right afterwards and talked to him about it,
How was it when you started compared to when you retired? Did they offer counseling for stress in the beginning? And or did it get better as you progressed throughout your career?
Yeah, it got much better because when I was in Baltimore, there wasn't a lot of compassion for you involved in a police shooting or saw something horrific, been a life and death struggle. In fact, I saw officers that were kind of scared to go on the street, scared to confront people, and everybody called them cowards. They didn't understand about post-traumatic stress. It's, oh, such and such is a coward, you know what I mean? You say he's afraid to go on the scene now. We didn't really understand or care to learn about post-traumatic stress. It was like, suck it up and take it, but it got much better. We would have, after critical incidents, we would, you had to go see the department psychiatrist or whatever, So, but it still wasn't enough, a lot of us hold too much in.
How did law enforcement affect your family?
Yeah, it was very difficult because there were times when I was out working a midnight shift. Here I am a narcotics detective. Actually, I'm in an intelligence unit at this particular time. And there's a serial rapist on the loose, and he's in our neighborhood. I get pulled into this task force, and now I have to leave my wife and 5 children alone while I'm searching for this guy who's wearing a mask, So that was difficult. Then my wife picks up on the fact that not only am I working undercover narcotics, now I'm on a homicide task force, now I'm on a Safe Street task force. She's like, what in the world are you doing? Are you thinking? And I'm like, man, this is tough. I got role strain. I got my family, my wife, my children. I have all these people in the community that are dependent on me. I mean, I have the world on my shoulders. And if I use there's an error in judgment and they walk, it's even worse. And I can remember in one case, they were doing a sketch with me on television and showed on the news. So now everybody knows I'm the detective, that the link pen for the case. So if I get it wrong, and I had to make a last minute judgment call in another jurisdiction, everybody knows it's me. That's a lot of weight. That's some heavy stuff.
I think you said you had 5 kids, right?
Yes.
How did being a police officer affect the way that you raised them?
Yeah. Well, overprotecting the family, a lot, that's a typical thing. And of course, when I say something to my kids, they think it's, I'm afraid of everything for them, so they think, they don't take it as serious. They think I'm paranoid. But when you've seen the things that we've seen,
right,
it's hard not to be cautious. When you've seen rapes, you've been in a scene of rapes, homicides and things like that, and it's pretty difficult.
I'm interested in your answer to this because of the environment you grew up in. Can you look back on when you started your law enforcement career to even now? How did being in law enforcement affect the way that you see people in society?
Well, I know before getting into law enforcement, I really thought I always looked for the best in people. I always thought people were innately good, And then you start seeing evil on a level, that I never knew existed. Yeah, so it was a big eye-opener. But again, because of my field training officer, he said this to me, and I'll never forget it. He said, Maurice, never lose your compassion for people. And I remember one particular time I had to refer back to that because I was particularly after the lady killed her son and dismembered him and stuff, and I was really fired up about it. And so it was a drug dealer that we saw. He about 19 in a colostomy bag, and he was always out there selling drugs. And my partner said, "Oh man, I feel sorry for him." I said, "I don't feel sorry for him. He's out here selling drugs. You know what I mean? He lucky. Then I had to think back what my field training officer said. Never lose your compassion for people. And I had to bring myself back. But it's a lot, because I was just, after hearing that and just seeing her face, how she found her nephew in that condition, it was just difficult.
Tell me about your transition when you retired from being a detective to a PI.
Yes. There's something, I think about 2 years before I retired, my brother was murdered in Baltimore.
Oh, man.
And that was difficult. At the time, I'm a lieutenant in robbery, commander of robbery. And each Friday, I would go down to different police departments and meet with the robbery commanders. So I go down to Baltimore City, and I meet with the robbery commander in Baltimore. And while I'm there, he takes me on a tour of the homicide section. He goes to a file cabinet, he slaps the file cabinet and says, "These are the homicide files. Most of these cases will never be solved." And I stand there like a deer in the headlights. My brother had been murdered about maybe 3 months earlier. So, I try to make sense. I was trying to make sense of it all, and the case went unsolved. The homicide detective went on vacation the day after my brother was murdered. He never called our family. To this day, I've never heard from the homicide detective.
Really?
Yeah, so that was a big disappointment, and I tried to find something useful out of it, how I can make sense of it, something positive out of it. And so I decided, I'm becoming a private investigator, try to bridge the gap between people who don't have the resource or provide the resource to solve their cases, like in my case, So they, being a PI gave me a sense of purpose. I was able to help some families in different situations with missing persons and things like that, and had one homicide case. But unfortunately, a lot of people they don't have the money to be able to, go the whole 9 yards with the case. But I was able to help a lot of families based on my brother's experience. Pick up the slack where police departments had dropped the ball.
Where did your brother? Did he get killed here?
Yeah, in Baltimore. Yes.
Okay, so you got no. It's not police courtesy, but the detective's got to know your background, right? I mean,
yeah, I went to homicide the next day and talked to his partner, and he talked to me for about 2.5 hours and stuff. Yeah, but he never. And they told me he was a great homicide detective. I mean, I know because I was in Prince George at the time, but I knew people who knew him that I used to work with, and they said he was a good detective, but I'm not sure. They claimed he was a great detective, but he never, not one phone call at all the whole time. I had to keep calling back there and everything else. They never called, not one time.
That boggles my mind. I mean, it's one thing to go. I mean, I think it's poor. I think it's poor professionalism to not only not call back a victim, but for heaven's sake, you're in the profession. Yes. And not only are you in the profession, you did the job, and to not even call you back at all, that boggles my mind.
Yeah, it boggles mine too, but it gave me some insight into what other people go through.
Oh, 100%.
Just like when I saw people shooting up heroin and burglarizing my neighbor's home. So I think everything in life happens for a reason. There was a reason why, So my purpose is to try to help other people who are in situations, because when people call me about PI case, I can talk to them for real. Look, I know how it feels. I don't have to make it up. I know how it is when police don't follow up on your family's murder.
Okay. One question I wanted to ask you before we start talking about your book. Did you face any backlash for being an African American in an African American community? Did anybody give you any grief at all?
A lot of grief.
And what do you think that was based on?
Well, one thing first of all is being from Baltimore, being from the inner city. I think it was like, can anything good come out of Baltimore? That's one thing. There was a lot of comments about people from Baltimore. There's a stigma, even more so now with The Wire, that was thing. But I think a lot of people didn't want to see. I was a very, very motivated person, and I think people felt intimidated by it. In fact, when I studied for promotional exam, they would exclude me from study groups because they didn't want me to get ahead of them. Yeah, so it was like, we don't want him, in there. So a lot of it, yeah. I mean, I was so motivated. When I came out of academy in Baltimore, I started studying for the sergeant's test. My people were like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm studying for the sergeant's test." You just walked out of the academy. So I was very ambitious, I was very ambitious, and I think that people found that intimidating. In Narcotics, there were people who didn't want to see me make better cases than they had. They withhold information from me on cases.
Mm-hmm. I guess I understand that a little bit. I mean, it's stupid, but I understand that a little bit. But I guess my question was more having to do with the community. Did you face any backlash for being an African American, from other African Americans?
Oh, definitely. And my grandfather warned me of this too. he begged me not to go into police work, and everything he told me was true. It was a hard decision for me because he never gave me a bad piece of advice. He said, "You're gonna have hell every day because black people are gonna look at you as a sellout. White officers won't accept you. You're gonna always be in turmoil." And he was right. Yeah, and you try to give them a break. They were like, "Well, instead of telling somebody to get off the playground or projects, I walk past them, and then a white officer walked behind me and said, 'Get off the playground.' And then the African American guy goes, 'Well, he's scared to tell me?'" I'm like, it's a lot of strange dynamics of, feeling like you're infidel, but I'm trying to make the community better. But yeah, it's role strain in a lot of ways people don't understand.
Yeah, okay, so I've always been curious about this because I would think, regardless of whether it's a black, white officer, Hispanic officer, but even more so with black officer, in that community, hey, you're there to help them. And why doesn't the community see you as wanting to help you as opposed to, you're a sellout, I'm not telling you anything, I don't care whether I might have known that victim that got shot, I'm not going to help you solve it because I don't know why.
Yeah, well, it was more of that in Baltimore than Prince George's. I got more cooperation from people in Prince George than I did in Baltimore. But then again, I was working really, working the projects and stuff like that. So, and it's not, part of it too is because of the way the police converged on like an invading army, so part of it's that too, so, not feeling like, they're officer friendly, everybody's always aggressive. So some of it I can understand, because of the way the police department, how they treated people on the street.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you really got a long way by just humanizing yourself and interacting with people, began to trust you, and really you solved a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and it was really good because people, they got to know me and trust me, and people call me Maurice. They didn't call me Officer Hicks. They call me Maurice. Everybody knew me as Maurice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they call me Maurice.
Okay, let's talk about your book. What's the name of your book?
The title is Looking for Trouble.
What I find really interesting, how long has it been out?
Since March of 2023.
Okay, but you're an Amazon bestseller and you're an International Impact Book Award winner.
Yes.
What's the book about?
The book is a memoir about my life growing up in Baltimore, eventually going to the Marines, and then joining the police department. So it's a collection of stories of growing up in Baltimore. It's a collection of stories that I had, cases from Uniform Patrol, from Narcotics, and Homicide Task Force. So there's several interesting stories throughout the book, but the main theme is I meet an aspiring drug kingpin who becomes a kingpin. And he is believed to be responsible for 12 murders, a lot of which were people in my beat. So I basically go from being a patrol officer to major narcotics to homicide to the FBI, trying to bring down the kingpin. But along the way, there are a lot of interesting stories, everything from high-speed pursuits, foot chases in projects, people trying to bomb somebody's apartment. So you name the thing that happens in a big city, you'll read in the book.
And that story that you were just talking about, the kingpin, that relates back to the...
Yes.
Did you end up getting that guy?
I'll let the readers, I won't give that part away. Even though there's some stories out, but there's still a lot of twists. Even if you get part of the outcome, there's still some twists.
Fair enough.
Even in the end, there's twists.
Fair enough. Maurice, thank you very much for the interview. Really great.
Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate it.